Good morning. I'm out in my favourite woodland and beside one of my favourite trees. It's an oak tree. And I'm standing in Glenstall in the oak woodlands, which we're very lucky to have. Oak woodlands are our rainforests. They're hugely rich in biodiversity, a huge quantity of animals and plants. And I'll explain why that's so and why I'm so fond of the oak woodland. It's becoming quite a thing to go into the woods these days, and now we have books on forest bathing retreats, which is a term invented in Japan in the 1980s because of the health benefits of going into the woods. And it's not just because it's nice to look at, it's because you actually breathe in molecules that the trees give out, temperines, which improve your immune system. So it's not, as I say, it's not just that they look nice or that they feel nice, and they do feel the texture is wonderful. It's because you do get a health benefit from them. The second thing is that Ireland used to be covered in oak woodland until Henry VIII decided he wanted to build his navy and cut down a huge number of them and denuded Ireland really of its oak woodland. So Ireland would have been covered in it. It's the natural tree in Ireland. So why do we find oak in Ireland, in this particular part of the world? It's all to do with the soil, the dark beneath our feet. That's what determines what grows up. And in this particular part of Ireland, we've got a wet clay acid soil which favours the oak. The beech, for example, would prefer an alkaline soil. Now, even in that, there's a message for me, because the life-giving is coming from the dark. And I'd love to read this quote from D.H. Lawrence, my great mentor, which he says, "What exhausts us is the lack of connection to our invisible life-sustaining roots. Down in the dark, we're inclined to live in the pretty pieces above ground, whereas it's in the roots, in the dark of our being that we've ignored for so long." That's just a message I take from the importance of the soil. So once it's come above ground, then it's light that's going to determine everything. Everything is competing for light once you're above ground, because plants need the light to make their food by photosynthesis. So some grow up trees like ivy, others live on them like ferns. The tree obviously gets the most light, the canopy. The oak tree is the top layer. And the great thing and the lovely thing about the oak is that its branch, it's a very benign competitor. It's kind and generous, and its branches spread, letting light pour down through it. You know, not like a conifer or a beech woodland where they take all the light, they grab the light, so you find very little growing underneath them. Therefore, they haven't got the same biodiversity. So in the oak wood, because this light comes through, you find an architecture. You know, you find an elaborate architecture. You find a four-story building, if you like. You've got the tree layer, then the light filters down to the shrub layer, and there you find rowan, you find birch, you'll find the holly. Remember the holly tree with its different leaves? All those are the second story. Then you come down to the field layer, where you've got bracken and brambles and ferns and all the other things growing at that layer. And then at the very bottom you've got the ground layer, where you've got the moss and the little things, the celandines that come out in the spring. You've got the wood anemones, the wood sorrel, all those things which flower in the spring, because they have to flower and get their life cycle out early before the leaves come out in the trees, or the bracken goes over them, or the brambles grow over them. That's the only way they can get light. So everything is competing for light, but the oak is generous. So you've got these 4 stories of plants, and because you've got the 4 stories of plants, you're going to have 4 levels of animals supported by those plants. You know, at the canopy, you're going to the sparrowhawk, the pigeons. You'll find squirrels up there getting the acorns and feeding on the cones of especially the Scots pine, which is native to Ireland, is here too. Then you'll find the middle layer, you'll find blackbirds and thrushes and robins and things. And then on the ground, you're going to find the foxes, the badgers, the pine martens all moving. The pine marten will move up the tree too. So you've got this hugely rich, biodiverse woodland, which is the oak woodland. That's why it's so important. And it's so important that we plant more of it. The other thing that I like to point about the oak is that it's a hugely generous host itself. You know, the oak tree supports up to 500 species of animal, you know, and plants. Insects living in the bark, in between the bark. Birds feeding on the little insects in the bark. Things feeding on the leaves. Little leaf miners feeding on the leaves. So it's like a hotel of the woodland. It's so generous, so beneficent, and the moss growing on it as well. So you notice on this oak tree here, the ivy's climbing up the tree cleverly. It's using the tree to get up there to get its light. And notice that on this side, which is the east side, which is the away from the prevailing wind and the wet, it's dry and the moss can't grow because the moss must have moisture. Whereas if I wheel around the tree and we come to the side facing the Atlantic, the west, you can see there's ivy growing up, but there's lots and lots of moss because it's damp on this side. Because the rain is sweeping in and it's damp. I can feel the damp here on this side. It's a cushion of moss. Beautiful to, again, to touch the moss. It's lovely to feel the texture, the different texture of the moss. So just, again, it's something to notice if you're out in the woods. Why is there moss on this side and not on the other side? Then all the spiders in the spiders' webs that you see on a dewy morning. So it's a veritable alive with, and that's not even to talk about all the life going on in the ground underneath me. And now we know in the last 20 years they've discovered that all these trees are connected by an underground, a wood wide web, which is, there's an internet which is there for hundreds of thousands of years before we had the internet. It's made up of fungal network of threads that connect the trees, and the trees can send messages down this saying, I'm being attacked by a pest, get yourself ready. That sounds unbelievable, but they have shown it to be true. They share information, so it's a community. It's not all competition, and they're sharing information. So it's every time you come out here, there's a question. Here's my question for today. If you note ivy growing up a tree, the next time you see ivy, which is in flower at the moment, the leaves at the bottom of the tree are arrow-shaped. And then you go further up, they're curved, and I don't know the answer. So allow your curiosity and your wonder to light up when you go into the woods and see things and ask questions. Why is this so? And here I am sitting on a dead log of oak. These are called nurse logs because they support, even in death, they support so many organisms. Lots of fungi, and you can see lichens beginning to grow on this and moss. And this will cover over and there'll be lots and lots of organisms growing on it. So even in death, the oak is bringing life, and we should leave these to rot to support a whole other community of organisms. So I'd like to end by reading a poem from one of my favorite authors, D.H. Lawrence. And he says, when we get out of the glass bottles of our ego And when we escape like squirrels turning in the cages of our personality and get into the forests again, we shall shiver with cold and fright, but things will happen to us so that we don't know ourselves. Cool, unlying life will rush in, and passion will make our bodies taut with power. We shall stamp our feet with new power, and old things will fall down. We shall laugh, and institutions will curl up like burnt paper. Amen. Wonderful. It's all for life and vitality. So I hope you get a chance to get out into the woods and enjoy and imbibe and be inspired by these wonderful giants that we live surrounded by and with which we share this planet so beautifully.